Hi, John Leslie here. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up a PPM, a Portfolio Project Management System, on the platform. I'm going to be covering four main things: handling infrastructure type projects, maybe hardware projects, anything that happens to be waterfall. How do you handle delays and dependencies? How do you add or allocate people to those different tasks within a waterfall project? Also, how do you set up multiple similar projects simply using templates? So those are the four main things I'm going to be covering, and I'm going to jump right in with the first one. So now let's see how these charts and graphs change dynamically as we assign work to different people, to different disciplines. Okay, as with any good tool, allocation of work can happen in multiple places. So let's start with the backlog. So if we want to assign work or allocate work from the backlog, it's very simple. Now, before I show you that, I want to show you kind of a nice ability here to automatically have work from any particular project tagged specifically to that project. So you can see here I have created a custom field called project, and that custom field has a drop-down list, essentially a select one list of all the projects that we're currently running. Now, through an automation, whenever new work comes into this particular project backlog, something like this, that through that automation, work is automatically tagged to project one, which is used as a filter to drive the various widgets over here in this dashboard. Work for project one, project two, project four, project three, project four, and so on and so on and so forth, however many projects you have. Now, it also helps to drive the capacity per project over here on this dashboard. So for example, I've got this new thing, maybe it's got, maybe we're doing estimating in hours, and it's estimated at 50 hours, like this. Now, these capacity boards, which I'm going to cover in more detail in a second, these capacity boards are also time boxed. So if this work is being assigned to a particular person, say John, for this sprint one time box, I can do this in multiple ways. I can drag that from here to here, essentially committing that work to John to that sprint one. And you can see a bunch of things happen when I did that, right? Because everything's connected in Favreau and these dashboards are real time. So first of all, the work remaining hours, total allocation for project one went way up, as you can see here, based on that 50 hours of work. You'd also notice that John's time bucket increased, right, for that particular sprint. And you're also going to see that it automatically assigned based on the column that I dragged it to in this capacity planning board to John. It also changed the burn down for project one because we're adding work. So again, in this demo example, we now have essentially a burn up instead of a burn down because we're adding more work than we're actually completing, right? Which hopefully wouldn't be the case in real life. And the last thing that automatically happened is a clear indicator to you as a resource manager maybe, or the Scrum Master, or just a management lead in general, that this particular person is now over allocated for this particular time box. So we can see very, very clearly by this indicator here at the top turning red that for this sprint, John only has a capacity of 71 hours. When that work was assigned to him, that 50 hours of work, that over allocated him. So he's now at 116 hours of assigned work for this particular time box, but he only has a capacity of 71 hours. So how do you set up these capacities? You can do that in multiple ways. You can say that for this particular time box, maybe a 2-week sprint, click on each person and say they have this, maybe he's spread across multiple sprints, so it would be 40 hours for 2 weeks instead of 80. Maybe he's taking 1 day of vacation, so that drops him down to 71 hours in this particular sprint of available capacity. And you do the same for each and every team member on that maybe cross-functional team for that sprint. You can also access that here under limits for all of the team members in a single place. It automatically is going to set the total. You can even enforce limits here. Now you also get this nice indicator at the top of the board, which you can even see from a dashboard perspective when each of these boards are minimized. Green, obviously good. We haven't exceeded the capacity for this particular group of people or discipline for this particular time box. Yellow is not, is more of a warning, right? It's not red yet. We still haven't exceeded the overall capacity of the team for this time box, 255 hours, as opposed to 262 hours of total capacity. But if we open this up, we can see that, one person is over allocated. Now, if we completely exceeded the capacity of the overall team, maybe something like this, then that entire board is going to turn red, indicating that, yes, we've exceeded the capacity of the team. And again, that can be seen when the board is minimized as kind of a RAG status of capacity, red, amber, green for your overall capacity for each team, for each time box, even for each discipline. Here for the disciplines, we're just doing the same thing, but instead of by person, we're breaking that work down by discipline. This can also be tied into the groups in Favro. So for any group that you've created, that can be a discipline-specific group. That is done here under groups. So maybe you have a group for each discipline, one for development, one for QA, one for security, one for help desk, whatever the case may be. And then simply assign the people who are a part of that group to that Favro group. And that's a nice way to handle a capacity board like this that's discipline specific. Now, to continue this example, the same thing holds true for Project 2, this Project 2 backlog, which is again linked up to its parent up there on the roadmap, which I showed you before. Say new work comes in. Again, thanks to an automation that's automatically tagged to Project 2. Give that some hours of an estimate like this. And that could be either added to the sprint allocation board or the milestone allocation board. You can keep these two boards in sync thanks to automations, which I'll show you in a second. And say that comes in and we're going to just do the drag and drop again out of the backlog. And that's allocated to Jack. And you can see now we're really in trouble, right? Jack is also over allocated. You can see that the indicators here in the dashboard widgets are also changing as I'm doing that too. Again, these are live widgets, live dashboards throughout Favro. Okay, so the other way that you can assign work, maybe not out of a backlog, is in the sprints themselves. So if you're doing proper sprint planning, the teams are self-managed in an ideal scenario, and they're assigning work to themselves within the sprint during sprint planning. So the way that would work is if I open up maybe that team sprint board, and this would probably primarily live in that teams collection, maybe over here in development team 1, but it can also exist here in this PPM planning dashboard collection, again using the power to have the boards in multiple places. But say they're doing their sprint planning, maybe they're breaking things down into tasks, and they have a new task come in, of course very granular, and we give this a work remaining, maybe of 25 hours. And when we assign that to the person, say John, you can see that automatically fired off an automation, and it added this card, task 2, and that 25 hours worth of work automatically to 2 capacity planning boards to his particular column, again rolling up that total hours. So to the milestone board and also to the sprint board, because the sprint is a part of this milestone. And to see how that happened, Again, I'll open up these boards. And you can see, sure enough, task 2 of 25 hours was added to John's column here. And it rolled up to that 25 hours to add to this total now at 204 hours. And the same thing here for the sprint. Now John is really over allocated. That 25 hours automatically popped in here and is added to this total of a now over allocation for John for this particular sprint. So let me show you what that automation looks like. It's very simple. You come in here to the 3 dots, go to automations, and all you're doing is saying when a card field changes, when a new member is added to a card, in this case John, and you do this for all the team members, you create a similar automation. You're just adding that same card to those 2 boards, adding it to the sprint board and also adding it to the milestone board. And that's how that automatic roll-up takes place, keeping things in sync across the system. And since those boards are in turn used as data sources, as you see here, these capacity planning boards are used as data sources for this overall dashboard, that in turn is driving the real-time nature of these charts and graphs. Again, keeping everything in sync. So Favro being super flexible, of course, it takes some work ahead of time to set these things up, to have that nice flow of very granular all the way up to a data visualization like this. But once you do have it set up, you can save this entire maybe collection, for example, as a template. So you don't have to redo all of that work and redo all of those automations. Now let me show you a way in Favro to plan for projects that maybe before they even begin, you want to know if they fit from a discipline-specific standpoint, or maybe you have projects that are already in flight and you want to know what it would look like if you borrowed resources from one project and gave them to another for a particular amount of time. So to do that, you can use the scenario planning template that comes with Favro. And here's an example of that template, slightly modified. You can build this directly into your PPM capacity planning dashboard collections, or have separate collections for each project like I do here. So what you need to do first is anytime you're doing any sort of discipline specific hours-based pre-planning, you should build out your backlog, and then of course for each one of those disciplines, estimate how much effort each one of your backlog items should take per discipline. Of course, I'm a bigger fan of cross-functional teams and you measuring capacity based on velocity, but this can be a good way for resource managers to figure out, do we have enough of a particular resource, of a particular discipline to achieve what we need to achieve in a timely manner for a particular project. So once you have that in place, all of those estimates across those disciplines in your backlog, then you're going to, over here in the right-hand panel, have an overall maybe release or milestone plan for that project. And you'll see how this fills up automatically as we go along. So say, for example, you have a backlog item that requires some product design. So we would take an item out of the backlog here. Say maybe this user interface HUD, which does require some design, and pull that in to maybe release one on the design board. And you can see when I did that through automations, it automatically added it to the master release plan up here, which is obviously a bigger bucket of capacity for this particular release or milestone, because it includes all disciplines, not just design. So that happens automatically, and you can see that based on purely design days, because that's how we're rolling up here on the design specific board, we're now at 36 days of allocated resource compared to 200 days of capacity. Now say that same HUD also required some engineering time. Here in days, we'll take that same card and pull it over to the engineering board for that same milestone of release. And you can see how that rolls up, and we still have enough in here to achieve what we need from a resource allocation standpoint for that milestone for that particular discipline. And as we continue to do this, eventually we're going to hit a point where we're above allocation. So say I'll bump one of these up a little bit, say to 20 days for the sake of example. And when I pull in this main menu for engineering to release 1, you can see that we're now over allocated, right? We may have enough design time, we may have enough for the other disciplines, but from an engineering standpoint, we're now over allocated. So maybe we'll make sure that's also in design, because it also needs some design work, like so. And we could pull that into all the disciplines that require, have to give attention to that particular backlog item. Design, engineering, art, UI, UX, whatever the case may be, QA, so on and so forth. But if it doesn't fit for one discipline, which you can see also highlighted here on the board and the overall roll-up across all the releases, you can simply take that one that doesn't fit for a particular release, and in the master board up here, move it maybe to the next release. And when you do that, this scenario planning template is smart enough to move that same card, representing in this case main menu, across all the different disciplines to that next release. So I can see that, sure enough, for design, it moved out of release 1, so we now are not over allocated in design, and moved it to release 2 or milestone 2. We're no longer over allocated in engineering because we moved that backlog item out of release 1 and moved it to release 2 automatically just by changing that up on the master board. So by doing this, this becomes a very good way to do both resource and milestone planning before your projects even begin. Okay, now let's move on to waterfall infrastructure. In this case, we're going to be using a hardware example, but this could be used for building out a new physical site. This could be used for rolling out a new location, anything where things have to happen in a very sequential manner. This cannot start before this thing starts or otherwise finishes if you're doing end-to-end dependencies, which are essentially what dependencies are in Favro, as Favro calls them, agile dependencies. So let's walk through this, how this would work in Favro, both visualizing and handling those dependencies in the platform. Okay, so first of all, let's say something changes. So before we even get to that, let's look at just the timeline view itself. So here we can map out essentially a Gantt chart, although we're using Favro's agile dependencies to indicate dependencies rather than hard Gantt dependencies. So if something does move or change on a timeline, it's not automatically going to push out the other thing, although it will shift it down, as you just saw there. So you basically want to take all of your backlog items and drag and drop them onto a timeline like this. So if I have a new hardware, something like this, you can drag that onto the timeline like so. And to visualize those dependencies, you'd simply click and say, I want to create a dependency. Maybe an after dependency. And what is that after dependency? In that case, I'll say this. And there you have it. Now, what does this look like on the cards itself? If I open up one of these that has multiple dependencies, I can switch to the dependency tab, and I'll see all of the before dependencies. I'll also see all of the after dependencies. Now, I can also see where these are coming from, what boards they exist on. Maybe they're on multiple boards. I can also see the status of all of those items directly from here too. Now, the way Favro handles dependencies is not by moving a spaghetti Gantt chart out into the future, which you may or may not want to actually happen automatically, but to rather have the conversation with where that dependency resides, that impediment resides, whoever's responsible for that, and hopefully resolve that through the conversation as opposed to relying on a Gantt chart. So here you can see each one of these dependencies has its own conversation thread. So I can go in and say, something like this. And then the person responsible for this can just click here in the conversation thread wherever he sees the card and continue that conversation back and forth with you, hopefully resolving that impediment, that dependency, sooner rather than later. Now, another thing I want to show you is, since the cards exist in multiple places, if I change, maybe something is delayed, and if I change the dates on a timeline, right, here in the backlog saying, we thought this was going to come in, or rather I'll do this one, this external supplier. You can see it here too, where there's a dependency here. This can't maybe start until this finishes. So say this external supplier component is delayed, and it's going to be here to here instead. You can see that shift out on the timeline automatically. Now, what we can also do is we can flag that as delayed back here in the backlog. Maybe just with a simple tag like this. And what that can do is it can, number one, signal on the card that that's delayed. If I turn on tags here, I'll be able to see that that's delayed. And it can also automatically send a notification, as you can see that it did here. So it automatically sent me a message saying that the date has changed with possible impacts to the dependencies, and the card has been assigned to you. And you can also see that indeed that card has been assigned to the person responsible for removing or resolving that dependency, or hopefully speeding up that delay. So this was done with an automation, very simple automation, basically saying when something is flagged as delayed, you want to send a message to a particular person, or maybe dynamically to the person responsible for it. And then also you want to assign that same person to the card so they have a quick way to get to it, maybe through their My Cards, or maybe in their own board where they're looking at this same work. Another nice thing in Favro is that since the boards can be viewed in multiple ways, I can look at these same hardware components, in this case, in a Kanban view, and track their status through to completion, whatever status flow each one of these has, and basically control that flow through the various statuses. So here, for example, I can say this hardware component can't move directly past quality control through to done. That's hard-coded into this workflow so that you have to go through quality control first and then move to done. It's also nice to call out that you can visualize these agile dependencies not only in the timeline view, but also in the other two views, both the Kanban view and also the sheet view, where they're indicated like this. And to turn that on or off, it's just through the view menu here. Do I want to see dependencies, yes or no? So to control that flow, making sure in this case, for example, we don't bypass quality control on purpose or by accident, we're simply going to go to the predecessor status and say set permissions, and we're going to control where this card can go from this status. So it could go back to not started. It could go forward to quality control from in progress, but you can't skip quality control and go directly to done. And it's really that simple how you can control the flow through the various statuses in the Kanban view. Now, of course, any date changes you make here would also be reflected back in the timeline view as well. Now, say you have basically recurring projects. You're working with multiple clients, and each one of those projects is essentially the same. So you don't want to have to replicate all of these backlog items. You may not want to have to replicate the timeline. So what you do instead is, instead of having to do it manually, what you can do is you can take this collection representing this project and save it as a template, which can then be reused for all subsequent projects of similar nature. You simply use this template that you're going to create right here, and when you click plus anywhere here over on the navigation pane, you just simply go to the template gallery, search for that template, and reuse it, and it's that simple. And that would include any automations that you'd previously built, and of course, all of these, in this case, hardware components or stages that need to exist on a Gantt-like timeline within that project.